week, but I don't have it this week.
Okay. So we are going to get started looking at Ezekiel 1, and we're going to read this whole chapter to start with. So hopefully people picked up the little slips of paper and are ready to read. They're all gone, so hopefully that will work.
My verses were very familiar.
Yes.
You took the same ones.
I took verses 1 through 3.
So you have to disclaim it before you can.
So I'm just going to start in Ezekiel 1:1, and just when your slip of paper comes up, if you go ahead and read, that would be great. In the 30th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the Calvary canal, the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiachin, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the Calvary canal, and the hand of the Lord was upon him there.
As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually. And in the midst of the fire, as it were gleaming metal, and from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze.
Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each one of them went straight forward without turning as they went. As for the likenesses of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. And their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies.
And each went straight. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of torches moving to and fro among the living creatures. And the fire was bright. And out of the fire went forth lightning, and the living creatures darted to and fro like the appearance of a flash of lightning.
Now, as I looked up at the living things, behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living beings for each of the 4 of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all 4 of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. Wherever they moved in any of their 4 directions without turning as they moved.
As for the rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all 4 of them were full of eyes round about. Whenever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them. And whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels also rose. Whenever the Spirit was about to go, wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction, and the wheels rose close beside them. For the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Whenever those went, these went. And whenever those stood still, these stood still. And whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels.
And over the head of the living creature there was a likeness of a firmament, like a terrible crystal to look upon, stretched forth over the heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one forward, the other. Every eye had 2 which covered on this side, and every one that had 2 which covered on that side their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a noise of tumult, like the noise of a host. When they stood, they let down their wings. And there was a voice above the firmament that was over the heads. When they stood, they let down their wings.
Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance, and on that which resembled a throne, high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward, I saw something like fire, and there was a radiance around him. As the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking.
All right, thank you. There's a couple comments to begin with. One is, if you noticed, as we read, there is quite a variety in translations in things here in Ezekiel, and we're going to encounter that through the whole book. Partly because, there's a lot of it that's kind of unique, like this vision. And so he's using words that aren't used often and that are, what is the right translation of this? And there's uncertainty because they're rare words, and we're translating into other languages. So yeah, just to recognize that that's going to be the reality that we encounter through the book, is there are significant differences in translations because of that. So we want to start with question 1, and really questions 1 and 2 are designed to kind of give us an overview of the whole chapter. And so I really want to say as we start, if you have questions or comments about something in particular, bring it up, because we're not going to cover everything. And so if there's things you are wondering about, you're interested in, you are, have some thoughts on, just feel free to bring that up. So we make sure we cover, those things. So question 1, how does Ezekiel 1:28 summarize what this whole vision in chapter 1 is about? What is this about?
God's throne and who was honoring him.
Yeah, we're looking at God. He's on the throne honoring him. Any other thoughts, comments as you look at verse 28? How do you summarize this whole vision, this chapter?
Glorious.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Glory, brightness. And just to notice, the phrase that's there in verse 28, the ESV has the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And that phrase is a good one to keep in mind when we think about this chapter. And the way that it's stated here, it's like Ezekiel is saying, this whole thing, starting in verse 4, the whole vision can be summarized by that phrase, the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And we also see in chapter 1, verse 1, as Ezekiel introduces this, what he says is, the heavens were opened at the end of that verse, and I saw visions of God. So that's the focus of this whole vision. All these details and stuff, just to recognize, this is the glory of the Lord. This is a vision of God.
You think he was surprised to see God like in enemy territory?
Yes, I think he was. I think this would have been very surprising to him, to anybody, that there would be a vision of God while they're in exile in Babylon. That he would not have been expecting this, very definitely.
I saw that it talked about the great clouds, and to me, the brilliance outshined the great clouds, and the great clouds sort of spoke to me of our humanness and sin, so that the glory of that rainbow shined brighter than anything on this earth. and that
Yeah.
the Lord is in control.
Yeah. Yeah, and that part of the vision really should be the center of all that we see here. That picture of God. But the other thing to recognize is, Ezekiel tells us at the beginning and the end, this whole vision is God. The whole thing. But how many verses does he use to actually describe what he sees of God? And all of that is only in verses 26 to 28. So he says this is all God, but all that he describes is just those few verses at the end. And again, like I said on Sunday, I think that really emphasizes the fact that he couldn't describe God. God is beyond any description. And so he says, this is all God, but all that he can say is just those few things at the end. So question 2 then, describe in your own words what Ezekiel sees in verses 4 through 28. Is it something an artist could draw? What parts of this vision can you visualize, at least partly understand? Which parts of Ezekiel's vision were weird or difficult? As you look at this whole vision, what stands out to you? What do you see as we walk through this vision that Ezekiel had?
Well, it's weird. I mean,
Okay.
you can't build something like that.
Right.
When you got four wings and you've got these wheels and the wheels go inside the wheels. And it's just, it's just tough to.
Though, like Ezekiel was brought to our time and say our future time, and they see some of the weird things that we'd even look at and say, what's that? How do you explain that? Like, how would he explain a car? Or how would he explain anything? An airplane or a helicopter?
Yeah.
I mean, because they've never seen anything like that.
And so I think that's helpful to recognize that what Ezekiel saw made sense. It worked. It fit, for him. It's just trying to describe it in our human terms. He just couldn't do it very well. And so it comes across as weird. How does this work? Well, how would these things fit together? But just recognize it was, this is beyond human understanding and comprehension. And Ezekiel is trying to convey what he saw as best he can in human language.
I'm surprised he waited till the end to fall on his face.
But how much time did it take?
Well, true.
It might have been almost immediately, but
True.
he had to then
He had to
write all this
down.
down.
That's true.
So-
That's true.
And especially look at the four heads.
Yes.
Well, they each had a human face. Got done with that, but on the right side was lions, and on the side was an ox, and the other side was an eagle. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's amazing
Well,
to try. No.
well, I was just gonna say, heaven is probably gonna be full of things we've never seen before.
Mhm.
And who knows?
Yes. Yeah.
Is he saying each of the four creatures had 4 faces, so there were 16 faces?
Yes. Yes. That's the way that he describes it here. Is there are 4 living creatures. Each creature has 4 faces.
4 faces or 4 heads? I mean, is it just
Four
face on each
faces.
side of the face?
It says faces, but how does that work? What does that look like? It's hard to picture.
All I know is if you were hunting, you would run the other way.
Yeah.
You would not be able to shoot.
Does it give any indication of the time of day it was when he was seeing this?
I don't know. I mean,
It must have been during the day.
It
'cause
must
he
have been during
was-
the day.
Yeah.
Yes, because he sees this storm cloud coming. That's how it starts. So, it must have been during the day. It was light out. But beyond that, I don't know.
He was with among the exiles.
But
By
that,
the river.
yeah, but
Is that just the whole place they're
the
talking about?
general area
The
that he
town or
was,
whatever,
yeah.
okay, the settlement.
And it's hard to picture exactly what that would have
Yeah.
looked like too.
I was wondering why he kept saying they went straight ahead, they didn't turn, he said that several times.
Yes, both for the creatures and the wheels.
Yeah, so what was the significance of that?
It's a good question.
The wheel within the wheel, I always get the impression of those cars that have the wheel that goes this way and the hubcaps that spin.
Well, my notes say that, one of the wheels was on the north-south axis and then there was an.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes, but still.
That's
they
often
go
the way it's
sideways,
pictured.
Unless you turn, I don't know, it's just, they go straight.
But most of the time,
Three-wheeler.
the description is about these chariot bends, right?
Yes, well, a big
A
section
big
of it.
section of it.
Yeah.
And they're the guardian angels, they guard things, right? The mighty,
Used in that way, a lot of times, yes.
Was each one just responsible for one direction?
Basically, yes,
oh.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we're struggling to picture this, but, a lot of times the way that it's understood is, because the 4 living creatures end up basically holding up the platform on which the throne sits. Okay, so if that's the correct way to understand it, then you have one creature in each corner, basically. And so Ezekiel then, looking at this vision, sees the one right in front of him, looking straight at him. There's the face of a man. But then he sees on this side, the one that's facing that direction, he sees the face of the ox. The one going that way, he sees the face of the lion, and the one on the back side, he sees the face of the eagle.
Was he talking about the eagle only goes straight, the lion only goes straight, whichever way they're facing?
Yes.
Okay, I thought the entire creature, that with all the faces,
Yes.
that it's going where the
It
faces
can
are.
go the right direction because it's facing all 4 directions. And that's why the wheel is often pictured as, intersecting, kind of like a gyroscope would be, so that it can go in all 4 directions again without turning. So, but again,
What does-
there's debate about, is that the best way to understand it?
What is a gyroscope for?
To stabilize
Maintain.
motors and other things. It's a stabilization device. They have them on cruise ships and spaceships and basic platform.
They use them in helicopters too, like when they go up and repair power lines standing on the
Yeah.
side.
Yeah,
they-
they're navigational primarily too, so they can maintain a particular direction no matter what the orientation of the
So
other
that
system
kind of
is.
makes sense then in some
Yeah, I mean,
ways.
that's
If they're
an
talking about-
attractive
Yeah.
image to think of this, the wheels within the wheels.
We need an artist to draw this.
Well, I haven't
They
found
try.
one that I think does a good job. It's really hard because there's a lot of interpretation involved in what this picture would be like.
I think the whole thing is just like a supporting cast for the good Lord.
Yeah, yes,
It's his support
Yes.
system.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
magnificent.
yeah,
This would be a good example of 4 people seeing the same thing, and all the reports would be
little
completely
different.
different.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. A different way of explaining it.
yes. And that's kind of what you get when artists try to
Sure.
figure this out, is you get a wide variety of what this would look like.
So is it just supposed to encompass all of creation? Is that the idea? And
The-
all
the-
of creation holds up? I mean, I don't know.
We'll talk about that in a second, but yes, the 4 living creatures seem like they are representative of the whole of creation. That the glory of God is seen in some way, shape, or form in the glory of the entire creation of the universe.
Okay, who's above it all?
Yes,
Who's on the platform?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. Just one other thing before we go to the next question, just to notice in verse 1, Ezekiel writes, the end of that verse, I saw visions of God. But then in verse 3, he says, the word of the Lord came to me, or came to Ezekiel. And just to notice that, the word that comes to Ezekiel in this chapter is pure vision. You know, there's no words that God says here.
Right.
It's all vision. But he describes it as the word of the Lord that came to Ezekiel. And so just to recognize, you know, what is the word of the Lord?
Jesus.
It ultimately is Jesus, but, you know, it can take the form of words on a page, a voice that speaks, but here it reminds us it can take the form of a vision that God gives, that is the word, the revelation of the Lord to Ezekiel in this case. So it's just interesting to note that phrase there. He was seeing a word of the Lord to him here.
Well, I mean, by words he created.
Yes,
Do you think it
yeah.
could mean that too? I mean, if all of this is pointing towards all of creation.
Yes, you know, it's certainly involved
Yeah.
here. You know, God is the creator, the one who spoke the universe into being.
Mhm.
So, yeah. Question 3 says, in Ezekiel 1:4, the vision begins with Ezekiel seeing a great storm cloud coming. Are there other places in the Bible where storm and wind are connected with a revelation of God? Is there anything that comes to your mind before we look at those verses? Moses, where?
I'm trying to think of the mountain.
Okay, on Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the one in Exodus 19, verse 16. You know, just if you look there, you know, just the language that's used there probably should be in our mind when we picture the storm cloud coming. Exodus 19, verse 16, on the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so the people in the camp trembled. And, you know, there's more of that description as well. You know, verse 18, the mountain was wrapped in smoke, descended on it in fire, the mountain trembled greatly. You know, all of those things is the kind of storm that we should picture when we picture this storm cloud coming that Ezekiel sees. Other places in the Bible where the storm is connected with.
Acts 2:2, which is on there,
Mhm.
the coming of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
It's like a rushing mighty wind.
Yes. And that one, you know, should come to our mind because this here in Ezekiel is described as literally a wind storm. That word wind is in the original, or a whirlwind is another word that could be used. And the word for wind in the Old Testament is the same word that can be translated spirit. It's the same word. And so the Holy Spirit certainly should come to mind here as we see this storm coming.
Come to my mind was Jesus walking on the water.
Yeah, in the storm.
Said
Yeah.
Peter, come out of the boat, you know.
Yeah. And Jesus is in complete control of the storm. Yeah.
And then I thought of Jesus sleeping in the boat when the storm
Yeah,
came. And
yeah.
he was this man that even the winds
Yes.
and the waves
Yeah.
obeyed him.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so just to recognize that in the book of Job, both in chapter 38, verse 1 and 40, verse 6, when
That's
God at the end of the book comes to Job and answers him, speaks to him, it describes him as coming in a storm. That's what Job sees as God comes to him. And so just, you know, some things to recognize with that. One of the things is the people of Israel had come to think of God as this little national God that was theirs, that was housed in their temple. You know, that was God. And the priests, they'd go in and they'd do what they should do, and they would get God to do what they wanted him to do. And, we kind of got this all under control. And God comes here in the storm to Babylon to say, I am not trapped in a building. I'm not under the priest's control. I am alive. I am everywhere. I'm God. And that was part of the message that he wanted to bring to Ezekiel.
So when he was, he was in the cloud by the tabernacle, as long as he stayed there, they stayed. And then when
in the wilderness.
in the wilderness,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So that's another thing that's really tough to comprehend.
Yeah.
And for them to say, okay, he's ours because he's here all the time
Yeah.
with us. So he's not around the rest of the world as it was at that time. I can see why they would say he's our God because he is here.
Yeah.
Either in the cloud or he would go in front of them in the fire
Yes.
to lead them
Yeah.
as they went out.
And that was never the message God was giving to them. That he was confined, that he was, limited to them. That was never in the message God was giving. But over the time, that was kind of the mindset that they had developed about their religion.
Well, it was kind of true to culture. Every culture had their own little God, and so it was easy for them to just think about that. Which reminds me of what you said on Sunday. I'm going to talk about that later.
Preach it, sister.
When you talked about the Babylonian God.
Yes. That's good time to talk about it now.
How that was their God.
Marduk.
Oh, I got it backwards.
Yeah.
Was the God of the storm.
Yes.
And that's how.
Yes.
This.
And so God comes in the storm to say, I know that you're in Babylon. I know that you've been defeated by the Babylonians.
And they think their God won.
Yes, and that's the message you're hearing from them. But I am the God of the storm. I am over all of this.
That was a cool story.
Yeah.
Cool
And the other thing about this is, where does the storm come from? What direction? What does it say? From the north.
Yeah.
When Assyria first and then Babylon later came and defeated the northern kingdom and then the southern kingdom, those armies always came from the north. Which again, they would have felt like, it's their power, their gods. God says, I'm the God of all of this. Here's this storm coming, revealing me from the north. I was the one who sent these armies. I was the one that was controlling all that was going to happen. And so all of that stuff, just in the way that God appears to Ezekiel. So Ezekiel devotes a lot of space to the four living creatures. What are these beings and how would you describe them? Got a chunk of verses 5 through 14. What stands out to you in the description? What do you say about those four living creatures?
Very interesting.
Yes.
Aliens.
Anything in particular, thoughts or questions about that section, verses 5 through 14?
When I was reading part of this, what came to my mind is some of the fantasy fiction books I've read with I can't even remember the names of the creatures with legs like in the Lion, the Witch,
Satyr,
and the
or the
Fawns.
yes.
fawns. Yep.
Yes, and I thought, I wonder if that's where C.S. Lewis got some of his ideas, or were
I don't know. Verse 7 where it says their legs were straight. There's lots of debate about what that means. But most think the point of it there is these are human looking things, because they stand up straight. They're not
Right,
Yeah,
right,
Yeah.
animals.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What seems particularly interesting to me is that they have, he's describing minute details. And then he gets into this overall aura of lightning and fire and flashing. And he talks about the bottom of their feet and incredible detail.
Yeah.
While these things are moving quickly
Yeah.
and having, overall appearances are
Yeah. There's a lot that's hard to understand. Like verse 8. Under their wings, on their four sides, they had human hands. How many hands did they have? Or four?
Yeah, on
Or
their
eight?
four sides.
So they had 4 wings.
Every option is thought to be correct here. And so, there's just a lot that's, there's open to interpretation. How did this actually look? And we don't necessarily have a definitive answer.
But he had time. When you look at the detail, I mean, it's not a flash.
Right.
You know, to
Although
know
those,
that they had
those
the
beams
wings
were
and
flashing
the
around.
hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, on the other hand, God sent the word to him.
Their wings,
He printed all of that in
the hands of a man,
even in a flash.
their wings.
So just like you get a text message or something,
All 4 of them,
but it could be rather lengthy.
and wings,
I don't.
and their
But the part of the point is,
another.
God could have done that. Maybe in a sense did do that. Ezekiel had this vision in his mind. He knew what this vision looked like. But he couldn't describe it adequately in human language. He just couldn't do it. It was impossible because this is a vision of God. The one thing I read said, we don't know exactly how this happened, but God gave Ezekiel this vision. He saw this, and then at some point he wrote this down. Okay, but the impression of this vision is so great. One of the writers said the prophet is so stunned and overwhelmed by the God and the angels that he sees that his descriptions are characterized by leaving out conjunctions, repeating words over and over, choppy staccato sentences, abrupt insertions of words that don't really fit. That's the way the Hebrew is written. And, it's just like he's overcome and he can't even write. And one of the reasons that they say that about this is he's given a similar vision in chapter 10. And in chapter 10, the writing is much more smooth and clear. Because he's seen it once already. And so he's not so overwhelmed by it. But in this vision, it's like he just is so overwhelmed he can't even write right. So
Is there any chance that some of these things he was allowed to see were symbolic?
yes. And we need to say that he's given a vision of God on the throne and these 4 living creatures, which are angelic beings. God, Jesus tells us in John 4:24, God is spirit. In other words, God does not have a physical form. He is spirit. Angels are ministering spirits. Angels do not have a physical form. God and angels can take on a physical form to appear to human beings, which is what they do here. But all the physical form that is seen and written about are all symbolic. Everything about it is intended to convey a message. It's not saying this is what they look like because they don't look like anything. They're spirit beings. But this is the message that God wanted to get across.
Didn't mean to bump you.
So that's, because one of the reasons we say that is, it seems like these same beings, the four living creatures, appear in the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation, there are four living creatures. Each of them has one face. One is the face of a man, one the face of an ox, one the face of a lion, one the face of an eagle. But they each only have one face in the book of Revelation. And so, and they're described a little differently. But it seems like they're the same people, the same ones. And so they take on a different appearance to convey a little different message. So we need to recognize that. All right. What name is given to the four living creatures in Ezekiel 10, verse 15? Anybody got that? Cherubim. Okay. Cherubim is plural in Hebrew. The singular is cherub, but these are not the little pudgy boy angels with stubby wings. That is not a biblical cherub. Okay? We need to make sure we get that in our minds.
What chapter, what verse was that?
Ezekiel 10, verse 15. Ezekiel calls them cherubim there. In what other settings do we find that name used in the Bible? Genesis 3:24, what's the setting there?
Garden.
Yeah, guarding the Garden of Eden with flaming swords. That's the picture. Exodus 25, verse 18. Yeah, so on either side of the mercy seat, there's a cherubim with the wings touching in the middle. And again, exactly what that looked like is really debated. But that's another place where these cherubim appear. And then Psalm 18, verse 10, and Psalm 80, verse 1 are probably the closest to what we see in Ezekiel. Psalm 18, verse 10, and that's one of the places where it uses the singular. If you look at verse 9, he bows the heavens and comes down, okay? But then in verse 10, he rode on a cherub and flew. So God is, cherubim are holding up what is carrying God. And then in Psalm 80, verse 1,
You're trouble and crazy.
talks about God enthroned upon the cherubim. And that's what's pictured here, is God is enthroned upon the cherubim. Revelation chapter 4, verses 6 through 10 is the place where the four living creatures are described. One of the places in the book of Revelation. So if you want to look at that, you can. All right.
So, Jim,
Yes.
are cherubim different than angels then?
We think that the best way to understand it is to say that the cherubim are a kind of angel. There's angels. Then it talks about cherubim, which seem to be angelic beings in some way, shape, or form. And there's seraphim, which are the ones in Isaiah's vision in Isaiah chapter 6. And archangels, Michael in particular. But it seems like those are all different types or ranks of angels or angelic beings. So, yeah. Then question 6, Ezekiel also focuses on the wheels in verses 15 through 21. How do you picture them? What impresses you about the character and nature of God from Ezekiel's depiction of the wheels? Talked a little bit about them. Any other thoughts, comments, questions about the wheels within the wheels?
I think they're sort of creepy to think about them covered with eyes. I
Yeah.
can't quite picture that, how they roll and don't injure an eye.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, that's a hard thing to understand what that would have looked like, covered with eyes. Those-
representing God is all seeing?
That's what
Yes,
I was
and that seems like the message is God is everywhere present. He can be anywhere at any time, and he is all seeing and all knowing because of all the eyes. Yeah.
Or it could have been like a kaleidoscope type effect, you know, where you have different colors and the
Yeah.
eye
The
is,
lights.
you know, it's actually got different parts that are, you can see that would be described like an eye, but it's just a portion of the eye.
Yeah, and so, you know, yeah, what that, you know, the here's the quote: the complex structure of the wheels is difficult to envisage. That's one of the commentators. You know, it just is hard for us to get a good handle on exactly what this would have looked like.
He said a couple times the spirit was in the wheel.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so the spirit of the creatures is in the wheels. In other words, the 4 living creatures and the wheels operate together, are connected in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And so they're going in the right direction all the time, whichever direction that is.
So it's like the wheels are alive because they have
It
eyes.
is almost like they
Spirit.
are alive, yes. Yep, yep. Question 7, how do you understand the expanse or the firmament in verse 22 and other places? What is the purpose of that? Where does that
I was,
word
yeah,
come
during
from?
creation,
Yes.
that's I think.
Yeah, it's the same word used in Genesis 1, the firmament, the expanse that's described in creation. You know, the picture I think that we should hear is, that, you know, the throne rests on the expanse. And that expanse represents all of creation, the entire universe. And the throne is above and over all of that. God is God. He's the Lord of everything. He's ruling.
You know, I kind of think of the picture of this as, in a human form, you think of it, a throne, and then, so all these, but in reality, it's encompassing the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's a much bigger picture than what you
Yeah.
normally think of in your
Mhm.
mind, probably.
Yeah, and that language, using that word expanse, I think is very purposefully trying to get us to get that message. This isn't just this little thing that Ezekiel sees in the desert. You know, this is describing the whole of the universe that is being pictured here.
You know, the other thing I thought of when we were doing this on Sunday is the verse that, you know, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess. And, you know, you often hear people say, well, how can God do this to people who haven't heard or, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, when we are all before God, there is not going to be any question. People will, nobody's going to say, but God, you know, it's going to be so amazing. And every knee is just going to bow,
Mhm.
or we're going to fall on our face.
Yeah, yeah.
There's going to be nobody's going to try to excuse themselves.
No, and that is a message that is important to understand and hear. You know, and it's hard for us to understand how that works in practice sometimes when we think about all the people, you know. But that's the point God is trying to help us to understand is, you know, he is going to judge justly.
Right.
But in that,
Right.
you know, on that day, there's not going to be anybody that says this is unfair.
Right.
you're treating me badly.
Well, we're probably all gonna feel like we deserve,
Right.
I mean,
Right.
just,
But, people will know, yeah, I'm getting judgment that I deserve. That will be understood at that point. Question 8, what's the significance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain? What's the point of that being a part of this picture?
Promise.
Yeah.
Remember that God keeps his word.
Yeah. In the middle of this terrifying imagery, there is this rainbow.
Which is beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is beautiful and points back to God's promise, God's covenant, God's grace to people. And so, it's just hinted at this point, the awe and the terror is overwhelming, but the rainbow is still there, even in the midst of all of this.
After we had our tornado down at Bay Haven, after it was all over, a rainbow came out. And to me, it was like, really?
Yeah. And you wonder if that might not have been how Noah felt to some degree, and Ezekiel even. But it's there to say, I'm God. I do bring judgment as needed. This is a fallen world. It's all messed up. But I want you to remember, I have made promises that I will keep, and I am a God of grace as well. Question 9 says in chapter 1, verse 26, it says that Ezekiel sees a likeness with a human appearance. What is the significance of this? Compare this vision to that given to John in Revelation 1, and how do we see the glory of God? What do we do with that? A likeness of a human appearance that he sees there.
I almost think it's God's grace again, and just relating himself to Ezekiel in terms Ezekiel can understand.
He does take on a human appearance to appear there. Yep. What about the last part of that question? How do we see the glory of God? Today, ultimately, how do we see the glory of God?
Look at Jesus.
Yeah. Yep. John 1:14, the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is of the one and only who came to the Father, full of grace and truth. And so I believe we really should understand what Ezekiel sees here as a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus.
When you look at Revelation, though, you have John, who's a disciple of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
When he sees Jesus, he fell
Yes.
Fell at his feet as though he was dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the glory
It
of God.
wasn't to Jesus.
Yeah. Sees Jesus in his glory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his response.
Yeah.
And that's Ezekiel's response here. But it is Jesus who is the one that shows us the glory of God, ultimately for us today.
And to think that he gave that all up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So we've kind of answered question 10. Ezekiel falls on his face, is so stunned, so overwhelmed. And that's a common response, that vision of John in Revelation 1, Isaiah 6. Isaiah has a similar response, and we'd say that is the only proper response.
That's
to
pretty
seeing
impressed
that.
too, though, because he fell on his face, but he could still hear the voice of one speaking.
Yeah.
So that means he just didn't faint and pass out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
He just knew he should hit the ground, but he was still aware of his
Yeah.
surroundings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'd probably be a couple days before I came to again.
We'll talk about that next week. We need to wrap up. I just, a couple of things as we close, is look at question 11, just to recognize in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1, Peter, writing to Christians, addresses them as to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. In the Old Testament, the dispersion was the Jews being kicked out of their country and being scattered to the nations. Ezekiel, the people in Babylon, were exactly that. That was exact language they would have used of them. And that's the way that Peter talks about Christians in the New Testament. And so just to recognize, believers in Christ are exiles. We're part of the dispersion. People of God who have been scattered throughout the world. We are away from our home, which is heaven. We're part of a kingdom that is not of this world, just like they were in Babylon, but they weren't part of the kingdom of Babylon. They were part of God's kingdom. And so, that message that comes through to them, even being exiles in Babylon, they are still the chosen people. God is still on the throne. Despite all of the problems, all of the heartache, all of the challenging things that they were dealing with, God is still at work and they can trust him. And that's the message for us today from the book of Ezekiel. There's so many things that seem like they're going in the wrong direction in our world, in our country. It seems like those who oppose God are the ones who are in control, the ones who have the power. And that would have been exactly how they felt in Babylon. The bad guys are the ones who are in control, and they're the ones with the power. And that was true in this world's terms. But God says, I am still on the throne. I still have power. And, ultimately, this is intended to point us to Jesus. Jesus who came humbly and lived and died and rose again in this world. Jesus who suffered and died a horrible death at the hand of his enemies, who were the ones who had the power and the control and did exactly what they wanted to do and brought about the defeat of this Messiah. But it was through those acts of power that the human people were doing that God brought about his greatest act of power in saving humankind. And we need to hear that and hold on to that in our world and the things we deal with today. So we got to stop. We'll pick this up next week, go quite a different direction. But there's all kinds of more stuff in Ezekiel. But let's pray as we close. Lord, thank you for this amazing vision. Lord, help us as we think about this, as we read it again. Lord, help us to catch a glimpse of what Ezekiel saw and understood and felt. Lord, help us to respond to you as Ezekiel did, to recognize that you are God, that you are on the throne, you are Lord of all. And Lord, help us then to surrender ourselves to you and depend totally on you for everything. Lord, thank you for your word. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much. I do have copies of next week's study guide. So if you want a copy of that ahead of time, you can grab one of those. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Email for insulating.